Body in progress. So how's your day gone anyway, George? Has it been good?
Yeah, back-to-back calls. I've made sure I've trained because and that's not me saying like, wow, look at me finally training. The past 2 days I've not moved from my desk.
Yeah.
So seriously, like yesterday, the day before, it was just like not
Mm.
no not moving from desk. I went for a walk on the evening just to make sure that I definitely got out. But yeah, it's just been back to back as
Yeah.
January always is.
It's funny, isn't it? That thing it's I don't know how accurate these kind of step counters on mobile phones and Apple Watches and stuff
Mm,
are. I don't know how, but there are days when you're busy and you kind of look at the end of the day and you're like, my goodness, I've done 600 steps today. Like
yeah, I've
that
done
is
nothing.
that's borderline static.
Yeah.
It's almost like you didn't get out of
Yeah,
bed at some point.
yeah. Oh,
Uh,
absolutely,
which is
absolutely.
crazy. We'll let people join. So good evening to everybody who's already joined, and we'll give it another
Hmm.
couple of minutes for other people to join, and then we'll get cracking. Do you find it as easy to train as? I mean, it's your world, so kind of it should be kind of almost like muscle memory. But do you have to factor it into your day and build in specific time for it, or it doesn't happen?
Yeah, so I've got a really adaptive approach around it. So sometimes business will sometimes direct how much I get to train,
Yeah.
but I'll have like a non-negotiable things that I'll do across the week. How I fit that into the jigsaw of a very, very busy week will just depend on what's going on. Even if it's a 20-minute session sometimes,
Sure.
and that's all I've got time for, I'll still get it done. And then over time, when I've got better periods, I can do more fun stuff
The
and
thing
enjoy
is, it's
things.
that whole thing, isn't it? It's still 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I swim not as much as I used to because I was getting elbow problems, but I still swim two
Mm,
or three times a week.
yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, oh, can't be bothered. I think it's just 25 minutes, it's half an hour. It's half an hour in
Yeah.
the pool. That's all it is. And it's funny how you find all these reasons and excuses not to do it, but when you
Mm.
actually do it, you never regret it. On the way back to the office, I never regret the fact that I bothered.
I always had this perception, especially with elite athletes, that they were people who were motivated all the time to train and wanted to train all the time. And then obviously this years and years ago now, when I was working with elite athletes, I quickly realized that they can't be bothered just just as much as anything else. And if anything, they moan about training more than anybody else than I've ever actually come across of how much actually it's just so difficult for them. So yeah, it's really interesting, but they do it anyway because they find different factors that contribute to that. It's never one thing. It's
Sure.
always many different
Yeah.
reasons as to
Well,
why.
it's interesting. That kind of leads into what we're going to talk about tonight in many ways. And we've got a decent number of people join us already. So I think what we'll do is let's get cracking,
Mhm.
and then we can talk about that very topic. So let's just get the presentation started. Right, there we go. And let's move us down to there. But yeah, no, you're right. I think it is. I think it's a lot of factors.
Mhm.
So welcome everybody who's joined us. Tonight we're talking about owner fatigue, which might not be a phrase that's familiar to everybody, but we'll explain it as we kind of go through today. And fatigue is one of those things that there's a cost to the nation, there's a cost to us, and we're talking about it from a kind of a practice owner's perspective. But actually, George and I are going to be talking about it from our own perspective as well. Because my name is Andy Acton, one of the owners of Frank Taylor Associates. As you probably know, you've registered with us. We value and sell dental practices. And I'm joined this evening by George Vernon, who's the founder of GV Coaching, and a performance coach and health specialist. So it'll be interesting to get my perspective, which is born out of experience, the emotion of working with dentists for 25 years and what makes them tick and what problems present themselves. George is very much coming from the angle of the science because he's a health scientist and he understands kind of what the markers are and how we recover and the things we need to perform at an optimal level. So hopefully it's going to be an interesting take. It's slightly different from our usual ones because normally what we have is you have a guest and the guest will give a presentation and then we'll talk at the end. But this is going to be more of a double act of me talking for a bit, George chiming in. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and we can grab those at the end, or drop them in the chat, wherever's easiest for you. But yeah, let's get cracking and we'll get going. But I'm looking forward to it. And like I say, I'm really interested to get George's scientific take on what I see from a kind of an emotional and an experience point of view. Does that sound good, George?
Sounds good to me.
Brilliant. So we talk about owning fatigue, what happens, how it feels, and what to do about it. And I thought to start with, it might be useful just to share some experience I've actually gained this week. So George and I are involved as principals, as experts in the Principals Club, which is a relatively new club for dental practice owners. And this week we ran a poll and we were asking practice owners from a fatigue point of view, what are the areas that you suffer with most? And it came out that the emotional load and decision fatigue were quite finely balanced. But it was interesting that fatigue shows up in these 5 categories, and it's reasonably balanced. The one that's slightly down on the others is exit readiness. And I'll explain a bit later on what exit readiness actually means. But that just gives a snapshot in terms of where kind of your peers are, other practice owners, and how they feel. And that, like I say, that poll was done in a WhatsApp group earlier on this week, and I only share it because it's quite current. If you're not a member of the Principals Club, you want to find out more about it, if you snap on the QR code, or there's the URL in the chat, and you can just click on that. You can go through to the Principals Club. You can find out more about it. You can join for free. It doesn't cost anything. You get access to loads of insights, loads of information, get a weekly newsletter. There's a WhatsApp group you can join and work with other principals. Guys like George writes articles in there. There's going to be some really interesting, creative content coming later in the year as well to help you stay physically fit on the days when you're working in your surgery. But I won't give any more away about that because George is working on that in the background, which would be quite cool. So just to kick off, and just to make sure that everybody kind of gets an understanding of what we're talking about from a fatigue point of view, this is kind of a timeline of what it's like for your average dental practice owner. So when you buy the practice, there's a serious level of excitement. You know, it is incredible. Buying a dental practice takes between 8 and 9 months. So by the time you get the keys, that pent up excitement and buzz to get in there is enormous. And that's what ignites your kind of ownership journey. And then what tends to happen is you then move into a phase where you've got your feet under the table. You don't quite feel like a rabbit in the headlights anymore. So then you want to expand the practice. And expansion doesn't necessarily mean the physical footprint. I mean, some people might add a surgery, but it might be extending services, bringing in new clinicians. There might be some changes within the business, but you also might add a surgery or add some new space to the practice. And you can see there that initial energy, it's still on the increase, but that burst of energy is starting to flatten off. But because you feel quite comfortable as a business owner, there's a degree of happiness that's coming with the work. And then the next stage on from there is you then start to look to optimize your business. And optimization is around systems and processes and putting in place elements of the business, which means it can operate not necessarily so dependent on you being there. Because without systems and processes and protocols, you tend to get asked all the questions. So if you're not physically there, things can kind of grind to a halt. But you can start to see, that line is starting to flatten out. And then what we see is it then gets to a true plateau. And this is when fatigue starts to set in and stress starts to build up, and it becomes a bit of an emotional burden. And once you hit that plateau, it's very unusual to see an uptick. What tends to be more common is we actually see a decline. And in my world, I tend to work with people either at the beginning of their journey, where they're looking to buy a practice, but most commonly people who are coming towards the end of their journey. And this fatigue, it tends to start at around about 8 to 9 years of ownership, and then around about 10 to 12 years of ownership. Quite often it can be quite deep rooted, and it's hard for people to pull back from that. But that's not an unusual graph and line in terms of how it presents itself. So that kind of gives the layup in terms of what the start of it is. And it may be that the people that are with us this evening may recognise where they sit on that line. It may not resonate with you, but for the majority of practice owners, that have gone through a curve that looks something like that. And I imagine that by virtue of you joining this evening, you may be through towards the optimization. You may even get to that point where it's plateauing and you're wondering how we kind of, start to get that love back into owning and running a business. And we're going to kind of go through some tips and ideas for how to bring that about. So fatigue kind of falls into 5 categories. The first one is the emotional load, and this is where you're running the business, everything's okay, but the pressure is just building up, and there isn't time for recovery because it's always with you. And I kind of describe emotional load like when you go on holiday, do you truly not think about your business? You're walking around some nice square in Rome, and you're admiring the scenery, and you're sitting down with a good coffee. On that break, you genuinely never jump back into thinking about business. As a business owner for 25 years, the honest answer is it's rare. It's rare that I step away and I don't have those moments when my mind drifts back into business. I don't know how it is for you, George.
Literally exactly the same. I think we were speaking just before everyone came on, and I was saying that January is always such a busy time.
Mm,
And the way I experience it is almost that it's a never-ending to-do list with things popping up all over the place that I
yeah.
didn't expect. And it's typically the unexpected things that can pull you into reactivity. And it's that reactivity that doesn't feel like it gets switched off. It's just how I have personally experienced it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So based on my experience, or when I see people who are struggling emotionally within their business, these are the 3 things, if my presentation would work. These are the 3 things that I tend to suggest that help people work through it in a structured way. So block time out to recover. So this is, make sure that you finish your working day, ideally on time. Your evenings, your weekends. It might even be a morning when you're not in the practice, but try and have a structure to when you have that time to recover. Because if not, then your work will fill the time. During COVID, lots of people were working from home. And I remember talking to lots of people, and the major issue they had working from home is if they were fortunate to have an office to work from, it was slightly better because they could leave that physical space and shut the door and move into another space. But because COVID kind of came up from nowhere and lots of people didn't have time to get set up, there were people working from their kitchen, from a breakfast bar. They were perched on the corner of their dining room table. So there was no separation from where they were working to where their home life was. So blocking recovery time became quite difficult. But if you're able to move to a different physical space, that can be pretty good. So that's something that's really important if you're able to move to that different space. The other thing is share the load. And I think as business owners, quite often we don't trust our teams to the extent that we could. We feel that we're the only people that can do it. We will do it better than somebody else. And it does lead on to that whole systems and process and protocols. But I think there is an element of trusting our team as well. And quite often our team are better at certain tasks than we are. But by delegating some of those tasks, it does remove some of that emotional load that goes with owning and running a business. And also debrief as well. Debrief with somebody to make sure that you're able to share how that week's gone and just not have it all spiraling around your head. If you've got a mentor, that's a great person to do it with. If you've got a business coach or a business partner or a partner or somebody that you can get these thoughts out of your head and into somebody else, because sometimes we have stuff going round that we think is a big deal. You talk to somebody else, it's like, that's not a big deal. That's not a problem. Honestly, if those are problems you got this week, you are a very lucky person. So that's kind of my practical side of things. George, tell us from a kind of your perspective and the science side of things, what does it look like?
Yeah, so just following on from exactly what you said there, I've got a business coach that I work with, and it's funny that you mentioned that reframing the problem. I came onto one of the calls with him and said, oh, it's been a tough week. And then he kind of laughed and was like, tough? It was like you're in you're in a heated room, you're doing Zoom calls, you've got plenty. Is it really tough? But that's definitely not to, not give people that respect around things. This is a real phenomenon that people experience. And when it comes to emotional load, the thing to understand is that stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. So acute stress, so bouts of stress, we adapt to that. We get better and we learn to manage it. Stress chronically, so exactly how you describe that, Andy, when it's non-stop, it might just be simmering under the surface. That's typically when it becomes a problem. And what happens is that systems that the person breaks down when that stress chronically over time is higher than that person's capacity to recover. And that's what then leads towards things like own fatigue, and in some cases burnout if it's prolonged enough for a long enough amount of time without that adequate recovery. So what you've mentioned there about blocking recovery time, the science really supports this. So actually emotional processing gets done in periods of silence and time to really reflect. So having that time where you're actually not switched on to notifications, you're not dealing with constant reactivity is extremely important. Sharing the load that you've mentioned there. Now that could be from just different perspectives. One of the first things that came to my mind was that it always depends on the degree of emotional load someone's experiencing. Now, just from my work with business owners, a lot of the time, people will use busyness in the business to avoid possible traumas or very highly emotional things that they're going through. Now, in those instances, it's actually identifying that and looking at, right, if that is the case, if this is contributing to this, who do I need to speak to? And sometimes it doesn't even need to be to that degree that, you're experiencing that high level of trauma. It could just be, something similar in the surface where speaking to a therapist could be the best option, as well as sharing it with the team, as well as confiding in friends that you've got other people who've had very similar experiences to you. I know that's why when we first spoke and you mentioned the principles club, that was one of the key reasons for it, to give similar people in the same situation the ability to talk and share, because it helps. And that's not just a subjective thing, that's objective, that's what the science
And
says.
it's something that we're typically not good about, are we?
No.
When you say to people, "How are you doing?" Everyone goes, "Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm great. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, everything's good. Yeah." But is it really good, or is that just kind of almost the defense mechanism and the stock answer? And quite often, you need to be in a very safe place with people that you kind of know and trust to be able to have these meaningful conversations where you're genuinely sharing the load, as opposed to just a bit of a surface level thing.
And especially with running a business, you have to be seen as the person constantly with the solution. So sharing that with people who depend on you can be even more difficult, even with family as well, because they're dependent on you for whether that's finances. There's so much things that come into that. The other thing that I wanted to share from a science-based perspective, it's very hard to quantify this. So how do we know emotionally we're dealing with things better or not? Now, one of the couple of ways, now there's many ways we can do this. One of the key things that I look at with people is heart rate variability. Now, that doesn't tell us how well we're managing our emotions, because there is no quantified kind of biometric. So when I say biometric, so recording data, way to do that. But what it does show us is how well our nervous system is being regulated. So the simple fact is that sympathetic nervous system is fight, flight. Everybody knows that. If you're under chronic stress, that's going to be activated way more than it needs to be. Parasympathetic is the what happens, the rest, the recovery part. And everything that you've mentioned there is actually designed to increase parasympathetic nervous system activity. So relaxing the body, resting the body's ability to recover. Heart rate variability does a great job at measuring how well you're regulating your nervous system. So the higher that number is, the better that's actually being done. So it's a nice objective way to say the things that I'm including into my day with specific to me in my life with the block recovery time. If we're seeing that improve over time, we know we're actually making a positive impact on how we're managing stress, how we're managing emotions. So it's really, really helpful. Um, and I pull that in from my time with elite athletes because that is one of the best markers we would look at if an elite athlete was getting close to burning out. It would show up there probably more reliably than anywhere else with HRV numbers. So we would really look at that specifically for that reason. And it's something I wish I'd have had a long, long time ago when I was training as well, before I actually learnt about it.
Just from a practical point of view, what's an easy, reliable, and simple way to test to get your heart rate variability score?
Yeah, so you see my wrist there, I've got a Whoop. That's one of the best devices that I've come across for looking at that, and that tracks it. Things like Garmin track it. So just any wearables. And what I wouldn't get stuck into is I wouldn't get stuck into looking at your numbers compared to the norm data, so everybody else's data. I'd really look at your numbers over time. So we're looking at improving your trend as opposed to comparing who's got the who's got the best HRV data because it's not as it's not the proper way of using it is probably the best
Right.
way I can say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's always be competitive with yourself, not compare yourself to
Yes,
others.
absolutely.
Brilliant, brilliant. That's really interesting, George, because like I say, mine is based on experience,
Yeah.
feelings, and the behaviors of my clients.
Hmm.
But hearing how that links to the science and particularly heart rate variability is fascinating. So that does show that recovering, however you do that, and giving
Hmm.
yourself downtime, it helps to de-stress you and the
Yeah,
situation. Great, great.
absolutely.
So we're off to a good start. So lifestyle misalignment. So this is where your practice is kind of supporting your personal goals, but you're constantly feeling compromised. And we were talking before we came on, George and I, and we were saying that we're both business owners, and we were saying there's been situations where you kind of feel you might miss a friend's birthday party or a family birthday party, or worse still, it might be an engagement party or even a wedding or something like that, or one of the kids might have a school sports day, and you're constantly being pulled. But the pull is also the other way as well. You might have been working towards a business objective that's critical for you to be around that happens to fall on the same day as a sibling's wedding, and you're not missing your sibling's wedding. So then you get compromised on the business side of things. And I think as business owners, constantly we feel ourselves being kind of pulled from one side to the other. And then how do you find that perfect mix? And within there, what I've distilled this down to from my perspective is trying to review how you split your time up. And I'm a firm believer by kind of blocking your diary is really good. So if you book in some time for a holiday, even if you haven't booked a holiday yet, you are much more likely to go away or do something with that time. If you say, "Yeah, I might go away in May sometime. I won't put anything in the diary yet. But I'd like to go away in May." Guarantee you, come April, your May diary will start filling up with things, and you won't go away. So reviewing your time and making sure that's allocated in proportion to what you want to achieve is important. And then there's going to be certain things through the year that are going to happen. So if you have children, there's probably going to be a concert towards the end of the year. There's going to be a seasonal Christmas type concert. You might want to go to that with your kids. It might be that through the year you want to take off your spouse's birthday so you can make that a special day. There's certain days through the year that on the 1st of January are going to be days when you want to not be around from a work point of view. Get them in your diary, lock them in. Then you're not available. And interestingly, the patients, the team meetings, all the things that need to happen will just fit around it because that's just the way that it works because you've allocated that time out. And then something else I think ties us to our businesses more than perhaps we need to be, and it kind of goes back to that sharing the load, is sometimes we do things that we don't have to do. And we either do them because we've always done them, we do them because we haven't invested the time in training somebody else to do them, or we do them because we enjoy them. But none of those are great reasons because what that means is that we're doing things in our business which takes us away from other things that are personal or family related or social. So for me, again, based on observing dental practice owners and their behaviors. If you do those three things, I would hope that's going to help in terms of getting a bit more alignment in terms of having the business supporting you so you can do some personal things. Because if you don't get that right, whilst you're a practice owner, you've actually just got another job because the business isn't really serving you. You've just moved from being perhaps an associate to a practice owner, but it still feels like a job. By getting that alignment in place means that it's more serving you as opposed to you serving the business. So, George, that's me from a behaviours point of view. Is there something from your side of things that backs that?
Yes, I think that's great in terms of the macro, looking at the holidays, blocking things in. And then I'm exactly the same in relation to health management. So ultimately, your level of health will dictate your physical and mental clarity throughout those days. So having a similar approach to blocking that time in, to making sure that you're looked after first, ideally in those situations, so you're operating at your best too. And that's not just saying, right, what training do I like, but what does the science say? And setting it from there as the foundation. And with training each week, a really, really simple guide that I consistently practice myself and ask everybody else to practice with training specifically is, are you resistance training at least 1 to 2 times a week? Walking 150 minutes or more per week? And then are you also doing maybe around 70 minutes of more intense, so like a sport you enjoy, or something that's, like running, then that adds in. And we know from the studies that really, really supports health well. So it's blocking that in from the perspective of, if I look after myself first, I'm going to make everything easier. The conversation I have with business owners and dentists, we all know that the healthier I feel, the more focus I've got, and the better things are. But to get to that point, it can be really difficult. It's almost like a paradox that I know I feel like I'm going to be pulled into this, so I need to do more of this and stay here. And it takes away from that, and then it actually makes things worse. So it's getting awareness over that as early as you can and managing yourself. And I go back to the numbers. So from a lifestyle perspective, it's great to set those holidays in place. It's great to manage your time, but then also look at that data. If you're managing your time, and I'll use myself as an example right now. So my heart rate variability this week has plummeted just because, it's just because it's been that busy. As I said to you, Andy, before we started, yes, the last 2 days I was behind at my desk just constantly, lots of different things rolling around my head. So what does that mean? So I've got my holiday booked to the end of the month, but that for me also has signaled a bit of a course correct, because I know from scientific data that that's giving me a signal that recovery does need to improve. Something needs to swap. Now, as long as that's for short periods of time, and I accept that and I manage that well, that's going to be great. If I let that just continue to creep, that's when the problem is. So it's also having that level of objectivity around your own personal health, just to make sure you're managing that as best as you can, and your lifestyle matches where the data is showing. So, if my data is best at when I'm at a certain weight, when I've got a certain routine, when my numbers are at a certain place, let's match the lifestyle to that. And then accept if there's short periods of time, we're going to condense those down. But as you rightly said, Andy, that business never stops. So there'll always be something to do. So if you manage yourself first, it just makes the
It's funny.
whole
I'm sure a
process
lot of
easier.
people took comfort that as the performance coach and health specialist on tonight, the fact that your heart rate variability is not doing very well and you're looking forward to your holiday, because quite often
Yeah,
we
yeah,
assume it's just us. We think,
yeah,
well,
yeah,
it's only me that's being affected by this. But
yeah.
the reality is that if it's affecting me, it's probably affecting other people in a similar situation. And lots of practice owners, they do go through a similar cycle. Yeah, that graph that I showed at the beginning of that kind of ignition and then the kind of the plateauing towards the end and that arc, that's not an unusual pattern for people to go through. So let's have a look. What else have we got here? So decision fatigue, that came out very strong in the poll that we did at the beginning of this week with dental practice owners. decision fatigue is something that came out quite strongly. And it's one of those ones where it's not that you can't make decisions, it's that it drains your energy because you're constantly being asked question after question after question. And quite often it's to say it's a failure of the business owner seems really harsh, but there are things that can be done that can actually fix this relatively easily. And given that it's so common, I guess people aren't doing it. But within here, lots of the things that frustrate people is they're constantly being interrupted and asked relatively low level things. Lots of the things that people are being asked, they're not often that time critical. Therefore, you may be able to implement a batching routine where, unless it's really important, you don't need to ask me now. You do need to ask me at some point, but you might be able to group together some of these issues, and then you might just get interrupted once for three, four, five things in one go, rather than constant interruptions. Because interruptions are really bad news, particularly for dental practice owners. But if you are on a clinical day, because that distraction and where you were locked into what you were doing, trying to get re-locked into that, and given that dentistry is it's a very technical, clinical, scientific discipline that you need to be really tuned into. If somebody asks you a question and you lose your attention, trying to get locked back into it, you can lose quite a bit of time from that. So trying to batch things can help. Also, have a framework for how you make decisions, and you might also share that with some team members as well, because some decisions you can make really quickly, others require a bit of time. And if you have a framework, so if someone's asking you for a decision around a purchase, your framework might be, if it's up to £100, you're going to make an immediate decision because you don't want to have to sit back and think about it. If it's above £100, you might have another category up to £500. You have a different process, and if it's over £1,000, a different. But just think about what framework suits the question that you're being asked, so you know whether you can give an immediate answer, whether you're going to need to sit and think about it, or whether you might have to consult with somebody else. But again, it takes the pressure of you needing to feel like you have to answer all the questions all the time. And then the last one kind of goes back to a little bit to the lifestyle misalignment about using our teams. And quite often other people can be empowered. So if you have a practice manager, are you fully using that person? If you had a head of reception, is that person being fully optimized? It might require you to put in some systems and processes and protocols so they know what they can and can't do. And that's the difference between kind of delegation and abdication. Abdication, basically, I'm just not making it, I don't know. Whereas delegation, you pass it to somebody within a structure and they can make those decisions on your behalf. I believe that those three things could really help practice owners not feel so worn out and exhausted at the end of the day, and also not be so constantly interrupted. So it means you can really focus on the task and the thing you're doing in that moment, but also it gives you clarity of thought in that when somebody does come to you with a question, you've got that headspace to be able to answer it in a really clean way, as opposed to, geez, this is the 35th question today. And then you might not give your best answer, or that person might feel awkward that they interrupted you. And next time they might ask you a question and they might try and work it out themselves, but they might come to the wrong conclusion. So you never know quite what the impact is going to be down the line. What's your take on that, George?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely perfect. And I think systems with reducing decision fatigue is the only way to do that. But the idea of creating a second brain where a lot of your decisions are systematized, I think is absolutely perfect. I think the research shows how effective that is. A theory that I'd like to introduce on this point is that the underlying mechanism. Now, there's lots of scientific theories like around the psychology for this, but one of the ones that I wanted to touch on was self-determination theory, which some people might be familiar with in here. And we've got three things with that. So we've got something called autonomy. So how much control do you feel you have over something that you're doing? Competence, which is how effective do you feel doing it? And then relatedness, how connected you feel with people. Now, the simple way, when those three things are down, that's when decision fatigue is going to be a lot higher. So in terms of that autonomy control, exactly as you said, and people are constantly coming to you. it's out of control. That's when, again, it's going to be harder to make effective decisions because you've got so much on at once. Competence. So it can actually work inverse sometimes in this case, that as a business owner, you want to be doing the high level stuff. If you're constantly being given those low level decisions, it's below your competence. Sorry, it's well out of range of what you need to be doing to be really effective each day. So then it creeps onto that. And the final one is relatedness. So you then start to feel out of touch, out of connected with people if they're constantly coming to you, if you're constantly having to make decisions that some people don't understand. So it's one of those frameworks that when you're setting the systems up, if you understand the fundamental psychology behind it and what's going to break and what's going to actually make things better, it then helps inform how we put those systems in place. So that's why I wanted to mention that. And it's something you can audit yourself on. It's something you can ask in terms of where is this lacking right now? Where do I feel out of control? Where don't I feel as effective? Or where don't I feel related or connected to the employees there? And the inverse as well, like where do I feel all of those things? And then we can start maximizing and reducing and putting systems in place to reduce and systems in place to maximize as well. And I think that's a real key way of looking through things. Like the frameworks, they're never the full answer, they're never the full picture, but they're really useful tools, and they're driven. And that one in particular is very well founded in the science as well of reducing burnout.
Brilliant, brilliant. Cheers, George. Very good, very good. And the next one that we come to is role creep. And role creep is one of those ones that I'm sure when the people joining us this evening, they bought their dental practice, they probably thought it looked something like, I'm going to be a clinical dentist and I'm going to be a CEO. Oh, that's it. I got it sorted. It's going to be amazing. The truth is you're also head of IT. You're a sales director, marketing director. You're looking after HR. You need to maintain clinical quality. You're also the CFO, you're the chief financial officer, and you're the CEO. And by the way, you still need to do the clinical dentistry as well, because that's a big part of what you do. And you can see that you're just wearing so many hats, and the danger of it is it dilutes the impact that you have on the business because you're being pulled in lots of different directions. I also believe that stress and pressure comes from being asked to do things that we're not fully equipped to do. So as a dentist, you spend 5 years at dental school, you do all your postgraduate qualifications, you do your CPD, you are an excellent clinician. So doing the dental bit when you're in the surgery, I bet you're in flow. I bet you're really relaxed, you're really chilled, you're working with your nurse, you're treating your patient, you get a great outcome. In that moment, it could not be better. The problem is that as a business owner as well, you step outside the surgery and you've got that long list that I rattled off of all the other things that you need to do. So it's how do you cope with managing that? I think to start with, if you just list out the things you're responsible for, that will help, because I went through that list quite quickly. And that was there's more to that list. But I think if you have an understanding and a comprehension of the demands on you, it will make you appreciate just how hard it is to own and run a business. I think if you list out your roles as well, you'll start to understand where you can have the greatest impact on your business and where you might need help. Because honestly, we all can't do anything. I'm incredibly fortunate. I got lots of different business partners across different businesses, and I need them because frankly, I'm not good enough to do it on my own. When I see solopreneurs who are the people who own and run their business and they're on their own, I tip my hat to them, because I think that it is incredibly hard to cover off all those bases. So if you're able to list out your roles, I think it takes you a step towards appreciating the bits you're good at, the bits you need to do, but also give you an insight to some of the areas that you might not necessarily have to do yourself. And then kind of going back to, how you can empower others. Mentor somebody in the practice, mentor somebody in the business that can work with you. There may be somebody who, unbeknownst to you, is an absolute wizard with Excel. And they might be able to help you with the holiday chart. They might be able to help you with managing the numbers in the practice. So try and find, there might be somebody in the business who would be a great, lieutenant that could work with you. But it's a case of finding that person, but then mentoring them, work with them so they understand what's important. They understand what the non-negotiables are, how you think, how you behave, what sorts of things that you want to do. And then the last bit is sometimes, and particularly when people talk in the context of the NHS, they often refer to it as a treadmill or a hamster wheel. And business can be a bit like that. Sometimes you turn up and like it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, start again, Monday, Tuesday. And I think you kind of need to create this strategic space where it gives you the ability just to zoom out from your business a bit and focus where you can have the greatest impact on where you need to do the things that nobody else in the business can do. You know, there's a kind of a thought process, and it kind of goes back to what George was saying about the level of competence. But we can only reasonably be paid to do the job that we're doing in the business at that time. So if we're on our hands and knees trying to fix the IT stuff, in that moment, we're an IT person.
Mm.
And it's trying to work out what things do you need to do, what things don't you need to do, and what support organizations might be able to come in and work with you so you can focus on those bits. And as I say, it's if you get it wrong, it does dilute your impact in terms of working with your team and growing your business. So that's my perspective on how role creep adds to owner fatigue. What's your stance on this, George?
Yeah, so I had a very first-hand experience of that, finishing my master's degree, spending so many years coaching and learning how to coach effectively, setting up a business and thinking, right, that's it. Clients will just come and it'll be easy. Well, that's about 6 years ago now, and honestly, it was like just that for the funniest thing of just realizing how many more things there were to do, how actually much more difficult it is that you have to learn a whole different field, and I think that's just from my experience speaking with practice owners who are new practice owners. It's kind of like, well, I was really good at this thing. I saw somebody else owning that and possibly wanted that. And then it's just understanding fully like what the cost is associated to that. And exactly as you said, having a process in place to put the right systems in to take that away from you so you can spend more time doing what you're good at. Because I'll relate it back to self-determination theory. If we don't have that control over things, if we don't have that competency, and if we don't have that relatedness with people who feel like they're getting the best from us, it that's going to erode mental well-being, and that's what's going to contribute to the future of owner fatigue, and also potential burnout cases. Now, the other part to mention, which um, I think is very, very important, is the mechanism behind why we struggle to delegate. And I know I've experienced this, but it often comes from the place that it's your business. That's you. So no one can do it as good as me. Or if you trust somebody, what if they mess up? That's not on them, it's on me. So then it becomes a case of, because we're so attached to it, it becomes so difficult to let go of that. So it's also dealing with that from a psychological perspective as well, and creating that separation. And there's not one answer to do that. There's very different ways that works for everybody. But just even having awareness of that, of am I not delegating here because it's not the most efficient thing to do, or am I not delegating here because it's painful? It feels like it's me. What if it goes wrong? So it's really bringing things back to what's a fact and like what's a story that I'm possibly telling myself. And it's very easy to ask a lot of questions to understand what kind of side of the fence that you're sitting on. Because again, if we bring it back to what I mentioned before, if we're looking at stress, so the scenario is we're heart rate variability is going down, we're making constant decisions that we shouldn't be making, we're pulled into every area that we shouldn't be doing, something needs to change or something will fundamentally break. And I've heard phrases like, I kind of hope it comes to that point so I can just rest. and and I have heard that genuine language, or even if it's not a language, it's possibly a belief. It's kind of like, I'm just going to keep going on
Mm.
that hamster wheel that you said. But the reality is, if it does break, it's just diminishing returns. It's so much wasted effort that could have all been spent efficiently, effectively, grown something that you're really happy with. It's just seeing that you don't have to, and that's the biggest thing that I'm learning, and I have learned that business really is who you're surrounded with, the people that are going to take that load off you, so you can do what you're really good at. It's like working out, right? Well, what am I the best at? and facilitating everybody else to help you elevate. And I think that's the really, really important part.
Mm. I think just wrapping up this before we go on to the exit readiness bit, I think it does depend on where you are in the ownership cycle as well.
Yeah.
Because I think if you're at the very early stage of owning your business, I think quite often a bit of role creep isn't terrible news because
No.
I think understanding all aspects and elements of your business are really important. Because then when you get to a stage where you do delegate or you do have
Hmm.
a deputy that's going to work with you, having the credibility of understanding those tasks that need to be done is really important. So I think there is an element of like, well, where are you in your cycle? But longer term, it's unhealthy to try to do all of these things because you just become kind of you just get by. Whereas you're better off doing the one, two, or three things that you really are exceptional at, and then
Yeah.
bringing in support for those other areas. So the last category that tends to factor in is exit readiness. And exit readiness is an interesting one. Quite often people quickly jump to the point, which is, but I'm not selling my practice. I'm not here to sell this. This isn't what it's about. I met with an accountant, very wise guy, about 20 years ago, and he had this notion, and he said, your business should always be ready to sell. Selling it, completely different thing, but it should be optimized and ready for sale. And that means your accounts are up to date, your numbers are accurate, you've got contracts in place, the business isn't too dependent on you. You just have this system and structure in place so that should something happen, and life being what it is, things do happen. Um, People suddenly aren't as healthy as they were. Sometimes people need to step away from the business, look after a family member. They might need to perhaps go back overseas to look after family there. There's a myriad of things that come at you from nowhere. But if your business isn't ready to sell, then that's where the fatigue kicks in because that's where it becomes stressful because you haven't got yourself prepared. And I work with a number of clients who have no intention of selling for several years, but we're just making sure that all the things that need to be done are put in place because ultimately only a dental practice is a valuable asset. And in the last 15, 20 years, we've seen the value of those assets increase quite considerably. So having a handle on what that business looks like is really important. And I think the things that as a practice owner you can do that will help is get a benchmark valuation. Through Frank Taylor Associates, we can do that for you. We can do it remotely. It's a desktop thing. What it does is it gives you an idea as to the value of your practice. And what that means is it gives you a thought process. Says, right, okay, but I was hoping it was going to be worth £1 million, but it's only worth £600,000. Suddenly you can put in place an action plan to get you towards where you want to be. That in itself de-stresses the situation because now you've got a plan to work to. And not having a plan to work to, I'm sure George will know this from trying to get people, physically fit. Not having a plan is a disaster because you're just kind of bouncing from one thing to the next. So understanding where you are helps. What it will also do is it will help you plan for future scenarios because you can get out of practice ownership in a number of different ways. You can sell to one of your associates. You might bring a partner into your business and then you might retire over a period of time. You could just sell to another dentist who's just come to you directly, wants to buy your practice. You might exit by selling to one of the multiples or the corporates. There's lots of options of what that looks like. But if it's not planned, you may not have a number of options available to you. And doing it early on, what it will also do is it will allow you to address any red flags as well. So if there's anything in your practice, the structure of your practice that isn't working, you can deal with it now. So typically leases tend to be a problem. But again, all these things, they add to the stress and the burden of owning a money practice. So addressing those few things, and like I say, it's got nothing to do with selling now, but it gets you to a position where you can relax because you now know there is light at the end of that tunnel. What about yourself, George?
So obviously this is definitely not my specific area. Um, with actually selling the practice, anything like that. However, if I'm looking at it from the perspective of just the human and those fundamental things that are operating, I look at it from the perspective of that identity loss. So relating back to
Mm,
self-determination theory, there's definitely the financial part of getting everything ready, getting the business set up, but then also psychologically being ready for all that. And sometimes those things don't always connect. I've had conversations with practice owners who said it felt like a divorce going through just because that simply those things, if we box them off on the self-determination, they weren't met. There was an autonomy, they felt like it was rushed, or they didn't feel like it was right for them. The competence, they didn't have anything they were going to that they that fulfilled those things, and relatedness, things may or may have not gone well during that process. So I think that's so important as well, that the psychological framework being there underneath things. And I think you're exactly right in the sense of looking at the end goal, because once we've got the end goal, we can reverse engineer. So we don't
mm,
know what we don't know. So speaking to people like yourself, speaking to people who are ahead of you that you want to emulate is so important to get it right day to day what you need to be doing now. And that's the same thing that I speak to people about with their health, with their wellness, of getting those systems in place. Nothing operates without systems being in place, and it's just the same thing that applies to the business. So I can really see that parallel coming from the health standpoint. So I think that's perfect. I think that's what people need to hear. Um, just so they don't get to that point where that they have got regrets. And that's kind of how I'm hearing this, like thinking like, oh, I could have done so much more, or this could have gone smoother, or I could have enjoyed running the practice more. And it wasn't the fact that you're not hardworking enough, you're not disciplined enough. It's not nothing to do with you. It was just the fact you didn't know, and you wasn't exposed to the right system, the right set of doing things. And that's why these scientific frameworks, speaking to
mm.
people with experience, looking at your own personal data, which is an evidence-based approach, it is so important for you. So I just always go with that outlook on things, because you're always just going to get better and better answers.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about that thing about the parallel with setting goals, like health
Mhm.
goals. This is very similar. It's about
Yeah,
saying, well, what do you want the ending to look like? We've got some time. Let's now work backwards from that, and what's
yeah,
in place and what isn't in place, and what needs to be done to achieve that outcome.
hmm yeah.
Um, Brilliant. So let's have a look what we've got. What have we got then? So the last bit is the things that we've been talking about tonight. It's all around owner fatigue, how to manage it. Are you suffering with it? There is a link in the chat to the owner fatigue website, and there's also a QR code here. You can take a simple test. It's 7 questions. Most people do it in under 2 minutes, and it will give you your own scorecard in terms of where you're at and how you're feeling. You get a little report that comes with it. It advises you in terms of where you're at. If you think that's of use, click on the link in the chat, or you can jump on here and hit the QR code. And the idea here is to try to give you information about yourself, how you feel, how you're operating, and try and identify areas that you might be able to improve. If once you've done that, if you want to jump on a call with me privately, we can do that, because a bit like George was saying with heart rate variability, it's not one of those things you can compare to other people. It's about looking at where you're at and saying, right, so where do I fit, and what do I need to do to improve my situation? So that's available to you. George, all his details are there. Great guy. You've heard him talk tonight. He's very passionate about talking about how to make improvements for you that impact your life, but it's backed by science. And it's funny because this has really resonated with our clients because of obviously the science basis that dentists operate within. The stuff that you talk about tend to land incredibly well. But all your contact details are there. And what's this research calls, George?
Yeah, so if LinkedIn is probably the best place to get me, I'll post so much content on there as well that's just generally helpful, articles. And I'm just conducting research calls right now just to understand people's perspectives even better. Everybody knows, again, I speak so much about this scientific approach, evidence-based approach using science, expert knowledge, and data, both subjective and objective from people, the person who's going through it. It's only through those three things do we get better answers, do we get the answer that's right for you. And part of that for me is constantly refining the way I coach, refining my program. So I'm running research calls right now to understand specifically practice owners and dentists, just how you're seeing things. Because if there's anything that I can tweak with my program, with how I'm doing things, it just helps me continuously excel. So that's something I'm doing. If you're happy to do that, feel free to reach out on any of those, and we'll have a chat.
Champion, absolutely champion, George. And then I think most people have come via Frank Taylor Associates, but if you need them, there's my mobile number, my Instagram, LinkedIn. And again, if you've got any specific questions, drop me a call. I'll be quite happy to have a conversation with you. So I'll stop that there. Cheers, George. That was great. Like I say, I know we talked before and we met at an event a few months ago. We came up with this idea. We said, wouldn't it be interesting to have a conversation about the experience of how dental practice owners are and their behaviours and how that links to the science. I think we've kind of shown tonight that there is a very heavy crossover between those two things, which is quite fascinating. We've got a few minutes. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask them. If not, that's no problem at all. What are your sort of closing thoughts, George, in terms of owner fatigue and those categories? Is there anything missing?
So the only thing that sprung to mind as you were speaking there was that I've got this perspective of optimal performance from the human, and that everything's a byproduct of that human. So
Mm,
because I come from that background of working with athletes, being an athlete myself in boxing, all that kind of stuff, it's just given me a different perspective on how I see business owners. So, from just an operating standpoint, day to day, if you want to operate as good as you can, be as productive as you can, make money, set all these systems up, you fundamentally have to be the foundation for that. So I just see that from that perspective. And when we used to have elite athletes coming in, we always just have this analogy of that they're like a car. So, like cars can consistently go for their MOTs, they get assessed, different tools in the toolbox for that. And then that's kind of how we saw the athlete. We look at it from multiple aspects, not just one thing. And that's
mm,
typically the answer people need. And that doesn't, for me now, I've definitely seen that the more and more business owners, dentists, practice owners that I've worked with, that it also really links to the purpose standpoint. So just away from the business. So it's that sense of feeling like you're not just leaving everything, emptying the tank in the business, coming home where, that's typically what you're doing it all for, and you've got nothing left to give. And it's so difficult to, and there's such a
yeah.
guilt that comes from that. So it's just helping people then see that. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I hear these stories day in, day out.
Mm,
And it's not because there's anything wrong with the person, and it tends to be very self-critical. It's just because it's just you don't know what you don't know. It's being exposed to the right sets
mm.
of thinking about things, the right sets of actions, the right way of looking at things, which is different for everybody. So yeah, I just wanted to conclude on that because that's something that,
Mm.
yeah, popped up in
It's
my
funny.
mind.
It's a story that's been well told, but I love it as an analogy. Is they say that if when you're on the aeroplane, and they always do that instruction, they say the entrances are here, here, and here, and you've got the lights on the floor. But when it comes to the bit about the mask will drop down from the overhead, they always say put your mask on first before helping somebody else. And
Yeah,
that I think as an analogy, it's so good because the truth is you are of no use to anybody else unless you've already looked after yourself. If
yeah,
you don't have oxygen coming in, you can't help anybody else. So, and it's like that. If you don't recover in your business, if you don't keep yourself well, you're not able to support other people. And because fatigue is one of those things that kind of creeps up on us, it's kind of quite silent. It just sort of turns up when you're not looking. The
mm,
danger is that we don't always check in with ourselves or with other people and make sure that people are in good shape and things are okay because most things they're not irreversible, but you need to have the awareness to see that these things are kind of happening around you before you can then put in place an action plan.
yeah. I definitely think that word awareness is like the key.
Yeah.
I'm more and more as coaching, that the science of coaching is what's the couple of key things we need to focus on that's going to have the biggest downstream effect. It's going to have the biggest change for this person, whether it's across their psychology. For me, obviously with health, nutrition, physical health, and awareness is one of those things that I think once you bring awareness to a lot of things, things start to self-correct
Yeah.
because you understand, you have different knowledge. So I think that's another probably finishing thought, that if you go in with that frame of what do I need to know, what do I need to
Mm.
understand, not not kind of do I just need to get by, I just need to get going, I just need to get going because that's just it's predictable where that leads as you've showed. Andy, the patterns are there. The patterns are in the science with fatigue, with burnout, that they show up predictably. So it's just not letting yourself get to those points.
Yeah. Lovely. Cheers, George. I think we're there.
Hmm.
It's just rolling up to 8 o'clock. So thank you indeed to everybody who's joined us. Thank you, George. That was really, really good. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you on one of our upcoming webinars in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for
Lovely.
having me on, and
Nah,
thank you all
not at
for
all.
listening.
Not at all. Cheers, all. Keep well. Thank you.
Thank you. Catch you soon.
Cheers.